Hello, this is the review of my reading from 2024, and I'll kick off with The Promise by David Galgut, which was a Booker winner and one that I really enjoyed, a novel. Let me just read from my journal. That's probably the best way to convey what I thought about it and give a brief summary. It's set in South Africa, starting in the mid-1980s, and it covers about 40 years of that country's development post-apartheid. So I said here, a white family runs a farm, and each section in the book, 4 sections, centres around the death of one member of that family, Ma, Pa, daughter Astrid and son Anton. The promise of the title is the one Pa makes to Ma, that the house or shack in which their black servant Salome lives will be given to her. This never happens. The loose parallel with the promise that post-apartheid held is not overdrawn, and it's more powerful as a result. The writing style is experimental in places, with the point of view changing, outrageously at times, and sweeping across landscapes as if being filmed by a drone. The author also occasionally makes caustic or knowing comments to the reader. The characters are brilliantly drawn, and the dismal decline of the old, white, racist South Africa is brilliantly and subtly evoked in this book. So it got a big thumbs up from me. I really enjoyed it, and it was nice to get back into fiction as I'd begun to find it less enjoyable. Okay, so next up was So Late in the Day by Claire Keegan. I'd had Claire Keegan recommended to me by a number of people whose opinions I valued, so I thought I'd dip in and bought myself a copy of this. It's a really neat, clever, succinct little novella, and Claire Keegan's has a reputation as writing brilliant, simple, condensed prose without a wasted word. And it's a short book, and I sat down and read it over a couple of hours one afternoon. I'd never ever been able to understand reviewers who've talked about books and said, I was so engrossed in it that I stayed up well into the night and finished it in one sitting. I've never read a book in one sitting in my life, except this one. I thought it was really good, but I couldn't quite see that it justified the reputation that Claire Keegan seemed to have amongst a lot of my friends, but more about that in a minute. The next book I read was non-fiction, and it's Politics, A Survivor's Guide by Rafael Behr. Rafael Behr is a regular correspondent in The Guardian who I read and enjoy. I particularly wanted to read this book because he takes a very personal view. The subtitle is A Survivor's Guide, How to Stay Engaged Without Getting Enraged. And he talks about the kind of strong emotions that people have been feeling around various political issues for the last decade or so in particular. And he talks about, he starts off with him as a journalist and being engaged with all these issues, out for a run one day and actually having a heart attack and not realising he'd had it. And his route back from that involves being able to engage professionally with political issues and write about them, whilst also kind of being able to manage his own intense feelings around these issues. And the book is, I thought, it's really insightful. He uses sort of psychological and psychoanalytical concepts to understand the nature of this anger and how it's being exploited and played on in various political spheres. It's a lovely read. He's well written. He's got a good style as a journalist. And I found it engaging. It's both personal, but also kind of covers big political events as well. And that play between the two, I thought, was particularly well done. Next up was Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, a book I'd never read. I've come across Baldwin and on and off for decades, but I'd never actually sat down and read him. And I read this with my reading group, and I'm very, very pleased that I had to do so. Let me again read from my journal about Giovanni's room. I wrote, "It's amazing for 1956, this book. It's the story of a homosexual relationship between a young American man and a penniless Italian waiter, and it's set in Paris. The city is beautifully evoked, and the demi-monde of seedy and wealthy older men and young men is also brought vividly to life. The room of the title is the place where Giovanni and perhaps David, the narrator, can be real, but its claustrophobic atmosphere also presages the tragedy that will unfold. Written before the 1960s and before more modern psychological perspectives came into novels, this book is remarkable in the way it gives insight into David's struggle to understand and accept his sexuality. We discussed this book in our reading group, and I was the only person who felt a bit bogged down by its middle section. So I went back and reread it after our discussion, that section, and I have to say that I ended up enjoying this book enormously. I think it's an important and very interesting novel. Okay. I then went on to read a book called Yellowface by Rebecca Kuang. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this is a book that had a lot of attention. It's very modern, recent. And I'd have to say that it wasn't really for me. I did read it. It's a rattling yarn. It's about a literary imposter. Basically, a famous young novelist dies one night in the company of her friend being a much less successful writer. And the friend purloins the successful writer's manuscript and basically gets it published as her own, and then enjoys all the attention and the fame and everything that followed after that. But it's also about the world of publishing, literary success, social media, PR, all that kind of shiny, fast, reputation building and destroying world. So it's very, very good in that respect. As I say, it rattles along. It's a vividly evoked story. I suppose I find that world very, very unattractive. I find it shallow, superficial, and gaudy, really. So it's very good at evoking that world. It's almost impossible, the level of kind of deception and counter-deception and accusation that goes on in it. So I can understand people really enjoying this book, but it wasn't for me. Unlike the next book I read, which is Annie Ernaux' The Years. In some ways, I think this was my book of the year. Brilliant. I've mislaid my copy. I've either lent it to somebody and can't remember who, or I just can't find it on my shelves. I've had a look for it and I don't think it's there. If I've lent it to you, please give it back to me when you finish with it, because it is a book that I really, really enjoyed and want to dip into again. Let me read again what I wrote in my journal about it. Right. I read this book on trains whilst on holiday in France and Italy, and I found it compelling and haunting. Born in 1941, Ernaux is a Nobel-winning writer, mainly of memoir, and this book covers the years 1940 to 2006. There are lots of details of French life, politics, culture, etc., that meant little or nothing to me as I read it. And yet, she bundles this in with the very big worldwide events and widespread changes in all our lives. The book's often described as a collective memoir in which she avoids the pronouns I and me, I think entirely, and instead talks of we and us. Sometimes this collective pronoun refers to Annie and her family. Sometimes it's French people in general, or women, or feminists, or a generation, or the whole human race. As a reader, I found it intriguing to be involved in this way. It is stunning the way she shows culture flowing through her person and through all of us. The millions and millions of events and images that make each of us uniquely us. I really, really enjoyed this book.